Yeah, good evening, Yvonne. It does seem a bit unfair to the Minister to point out who he wasn't able to meet on this trip, but the elephant in the room, or perhaps more properly the dragon in the room in this case, was China, and its shadow loomed large over this trip. There was a lot of talk about the need for Australia to diversify its export markets, given the level of tension in that relationship. But Dan Tehan says that the partners that he did meet were interested in what Australia had to say about the relationship with China. But given that he's now been in the role since before Christmas, he says he's still unable to get a direct response from his Chinese counterpart.
So I've never met face to face or had a direct speaking engagement with my Chinese counterpart. Obviously, when I took this job just before Christmas, one of the first things I did was write to my Chinese counterpart in early January, suggesting that these are all the things that we could discuss. This is why it's in both countries' interest that we should be able to sit down and talk, whether it be trying to work through the existing trade disputes that we have, or looking at how we could cooperate through APEC or the WTO, etc.
And Carrington, South Korea is a major purchaser of Australian coal, but it's committed to zero net emissions by 2050. What does that mean for the Australian economy?
Yeah, President Moon of South Korea, who's in the last year of his 5-year term, he can't go for a re-election under the Constitution of South Korea, has really pushed to get action on climate change as one of his lasting legacies. South Korea has signed up for net zero emissions by 2020, where Australia has not. It does have an emissions trading scheme in place, but it's also a major purchaser of Australian coal. It spends about $3 billion a year, that was back in 2019 at least, on Australian coal used for power generation. So it's a lot of money. Now, Dan Tehan says that there is opportunities for Australia to diversify its supply of energy to South Korea, even if they move away from purchasing coal from us, be it in the form of either ammonia or hydrogen. But at the moment, a lot of people would suggest this move by South Korea, as well as other partners in the region, away from coal will blow a big hole in the Australian budget.
And the European Union has unveiled a plan for a carbon tariff to effectively tax higher polluting countries. How will Australia be affected?
Well, Australia has been quite vocal already on this issue. It was only unveiled last week on Wednesday, that the European Union was looking at doing this. The idea is that by placing a tax on other countries that don't have a carbon price, that would make sure that the European companies that are producing whatever it might be, if aluminum or fertiliser, high carbon intensive or high energy intensive products, that they wouldn't face a disadvantage by competing against countries that don't pay a similar carbon price. This is obviously a disadvantage for Australia under the way Australia's economy currently functions. Dan Tehan says that South Korea and other partners within the region, though, are sympathetic to Australia's position and will be against the European move to impose this carbon tariff.
Well, everything that I've learned from this trip so far, whether it be in Singapore, Japan, Vietnam or here in South Korea, is that they don't think that the European Union approach is the right way to go.
And Carrington, just finally, the South Korean president has announced he won't go to Japan this week for a long-rumoured summit. A sign of deteriorating ties?
I think it's clear that the relationship has yet again deteriorated. This has been on the cards and then off the cards over repeated occasions in the last few months. South Korea and Japan have a long and difficult past and history. The scars of Japanese colonialisation in Seoul are still very apparent, and particularly in recent years there have been a range of issues which South Korea has taken offence on regarding Japan, and whether or not they have actually paid for their crimes, as South Korea sees it, both during the colonial period and particularly during World War II. last week we had a senior diplomat in the Japanese embassy here in Seoul use pretty loaded language when describing President Moon's suggestion for a summit in Tokyo this week, described the plans that were being put forward as him effectively masturbating. Now, that's been knocked down by the Japanese government, and that diplomat will now be recalled. But President Moon has now decided he won't be going to Japan on Friday for the Olympics, and it'll be interesting to see how this relationship is patched up.
Carrington Clarke in Seoul, thank you.